Okay, I'm back, and the recordings will be available shortly. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm excited to introduce you to Tim Daniels today. He's currently the manager for Lyrasis Technology Services, and previously he was the Assistant State Librarian for Technology and Infrastructure at the Georgia Public Library Service. During much of his library career, he's been involved in technology and technology training, and we're very excited to have him here today to speak to us. Thanks very much, Tim. Please take it away.
All right, everyone. Thanks for participating and attending. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. For those of you who I've talked to before, before I started actually working at Lyrasis, I've done a lot of training for them, a lot of online classes, that kind of thing. So you may have run across me there. And so I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about what kind of led me to think about this topic that we're going to talk about this morning, which is deciding on IT and thinking about decision support and that kind of thing. And so basically, for those of you that do not know, Lyrasis is a member organization. It used to be Solonet and Palanet and Nelanet, and then another group called BCR, and the BCR group was in Colorado and kind of in the middle of the U.S., and Palanet was in Philadelphia, in that area, and then Nelanet was in New England. And so all of these things have kind of joined together to form this company called Lyrasis. And what we are is a library member organization. So libraries who are members, we try to help them procure services and that kind of thing. But what I'm doing for Lyrasis is kind of a new angle on stuff for them, and that is they're trying to start up a hosting service for libraries who want IT or want to use open source or that kind of thing, but don't want to run it for themselves. And so as part of this venture, we put in for and got a Mellon grant, and part of the Mellon grant said that we would set up some free services as well as trying to figure out how to make a little bit of money off of this stuff. But we would also set up some free services and help with decision support. And so we've got a couple of different things in the planning phases, but after we got that grant, it really has started me thinking, well, you know, how do we decide on what to buy, and how do we decide on our services? Anything from, you know, PCs for our staffs, PCs that go out to the public, all the way up to enterprise systems. So, you know, how do we pick those, and what do we do, and how do we get there? And so what you're going to get today is kind of the beginnings of my thought process, and I'm going to be asking you folks a lot of questions to get your feedback as well. So I hope that you'll chime in on chat, or, you know, raise your hand while I ask questions, or let me know, and sort of participate as well. And so as part of this, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine about this whole process, right, and deciding and how we go forward and what we're going to do. And one of the things that she recommended to me, she said, well, you know, one of the first things you should do is, if you go in to talk to people about decision support and how they decide and what they're going to decide, is you should do a risk tolerance test for them, or try to help them figure out, you know, how adverse to risk they are. And this is something that financial planners do. And as a librarian, I don't really find myself in the need of the services of a financial planner very often, but occasionally, you know, it may come up. So one of the things that I also started looking at was risk tolerance. And risk tolerance is basically, either for yourself or for your organization, is how comfortable you are with taking a risk, right? You know, how far out on the limb are you willing to go for some type of technology or some type of tool that you might want to do? And one of the things that you can point to right away, because it's one of the things that I'm going to be working with people a lot on, is open source and open source tools. And to be a part of an open source community and be involved, you know, and put a lot of your enterprise system stuff into that open source arena is not always for the faint of heart, because it is something that you've got to have a pretty high tolerance for risk for, and you've got to be willing to put some dollars behind, because unlike the hype around a lot of open source, it's not always free, right? It's free as in like my free dog that somebody gave me that over the last 2 years I've spent about $5,000 on, counting putting in a fence, taking him to the vet when he cut his leg, and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So I got a message that said my audio was a bit scratchy, but my microphone is built in to the computer, so I don't know that there's much I can do for that. That's fine? Oh, good. Thank you. All right. So now, when I started looking at risk tolerance, right, one of the first things I ran into was this. And I thought, oh, my God, it's math. I can't do math. I'm a librarian. I don't do math. So I looked at this and just decided to skip it completely and go on to thinking about risk in yes, this is a very scary sort of slide, isn't it? If I had to do this to assess somebody's risk tolerance, I think I would find something else to do. But really, risk is it's a balance thing, right? It's how much risk you're willing to take for the value you're willing to get. And it varies for a lot of organizations. It's kind of like, how many of you are in organizations where they'll only buy you a PC and they're afraid to bring a Mac in? Yeah, see, there's quite a bit of people, a few of you out there that are in that kind of situation. And so, and that's it. Are they, are people willing to take that, or is your IT team really willing to take that risk of getting a Mac and trying to make it work on the network versus just taking a PC, which they know is going to more or less work on the network, and sticking it out there? And when I was at GPLS, one of the things that we had started experimenting with was rolling out Macs to people and looking at longevity. Because in today's society, if your network people are worth anything at all, they can make Macs work on your network. And so that shouldn't be a problem. And so therefore, really, it should be about longevity versus value. And so one of the things we were testing out is, theoretically, a Mac will last longer than a PC for most people. And let's roll some out to some people who have a high tolerance for risk, because one of the things we told them is, yes, you can use a Mac, but you have to do your own support. So you're on your own as far as doing your IT support piece of that. And before I left, it had seemed to settle out pretty well. And of course, there were some people who weren't interested at all and some people who wanted to try it. But basically, to get back to the point, the value in that for us would be, we take a little bit of a risk and spend a little bit more money on somebody's laptop or somebody's desktop machine. But the value would be, if it lasted an extra 2 years beyond what a PC might last, then the value would be in that return and that money saved over the course of time. So really, it is about how comfortable you are making that kind of risk. And to really put it in perspective of like library language and library land, you can also look at, say, patron-driven acquisitions. And I don't know if you folks are familiar with this idea or not, but basically it's a way to let patrons spend collection development money and sort of buy stuff that they need out of your collection development pool, right? Which is a big risk, because you're letting go of that valuable resource of money and sort of depending on the patron to know what they need. And hoping that, one person doesn't monopolize things and that kind of stuff. So, and Bob says that they have a limited version of that for Kindle books in Broward County. I think that's a great idea. And that's another thing, when you're looking at your risk, it's not like you have to, it's not an all or nothing thing, right? It's like Bob said, they're out there and they have a limited amount of that, which makes perfect sense And I can tell you, I bet it would go a long way towards making your patrons very happy with you as well. So the PR piece of that has got to be huge. And here's another question for you guys. So we're talking about risk and thinking about your public interface. There are two things out there going on. There's this company, and it's mostly in Europe right now. And what they'll do is they will design a website for a library for free. And so they put it out there, but the only thing is you have to agree to let them put a Google search box on that web page somewhere. And then what they do is anytime somebody searches in that Google search box and clicks on one of the ads, the company, anywhere.me, gets a certain amount of money. And what they say is they'll split that money in half with the library. So they take half of the ad revenue and the library gets half of the ad revenue. Now some libraries feel that that's kind of risky because they're adding that commercial component to what they're doing. And some people think it's a great idea because it's a way for them to generate some revenue. And the same kind of thing with Amazon. There are a couple library people that I've talked to who use the Amazon book jackets and Amazon links in their ILS. And if one of their patrons buys a book based on clicking on that URL out of the ILS, Amazon actually will give the library a certain percentage of that profit from the sale of the book. So, is it worth it? You're sending your patrons to a different route to get something, but you're allowing them to get what they want when they want it. So it's, it could be a little risky. So it's just kind of your comfort level. And that's one thing that you really have to know and really have to think about when you're making a decision is, are you or is your organization totally risk adverse? Because if you're the one making the decision and at the end of the day, if you make the wrong decision, you're going to get smacked down for it, then that's going to hold you back on what you might decide. Whereas if you're in an organization that values risk-taking, then you might be a little more bold and take a little extra risk, and you might receive a bigger reward for that. So it's all a balance kind of deal. So, so it comes back to it. So why do we care about this? I mean, one of the big things that we buy are automation systems, right? Our ILS, we spend a lot of money on that, and on our IT in general. I think I've heard the average percentage that some libraries spend, their ILS included, but in IT in general, can be somewhere up to 70% after you add it all up of their budget. And so that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money that you have to decide about. And so we're dependent upon our automation, our integration, and then of course we're also dependent on our campuses or our counties or the other organizations that we're part of and how our IT integrates with their IT. And so that's part of your risk in your decision-making process, right, is how is this going to fit in with my ecosystem? You can see that point at the bottom. And I heard this term the other day, and I think I've heard it before, but I was listening to an IT podcast, and one of the people they were at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, which as I was going out to ALA, I was kind of wishing that my plane was going to stop off in Vegas and I could go to CES and let everybody else go on to onto ALA midwinter, but that didn't happen. So in any event, and so there was a lot of cool stuff that was going on there, but one of the things that they were talking about was your ecosystem and the difference between that and convergence. So instead of everything being, having just sort of one device and one file type and one system that all works in the same place, it's really about all of these pieces and how they work together and how, in their aspect, because they were talking about consumer stuff, how all of it worked together to support consumer devices, but it's the same thing for us, right? So we have our ILS, we have our e-journals, we have our e-books, we have all of these services, and how do those all fit together to form an ecosystem that supports our users and lets us do, fulfill our missions and do the things we need to do. And I know that's sort of a departure from talking about risk stuff, but it does kind of move towards talking about decision making. But in any event, I wanted to throw that out there. And then, another thing with risk, when you hear people talk about information security and securing your network, risk is a big topic there as well. So where are you? How many of you feel like you're in an organization where risk-taking is supported, or it's something that people are willing to do, or your upper-level administration is willing to do? So that's cool. 3 out of 73. Hey. Excellent. There's a chat that was directed at me that said library administration yes and IT no, and that's one good thing. And I don't know how many of you folks are IT people and how many of you folks are reference people or access services people. So I try to offend everyone equally. And the one thing I will say is a lot of times your IT departments are really your most conservative group. And one of the reasons they're your most conservative group as far as risk and that kind of thing goes is because they're the ones that are going to have to fix it if it breaks. And they don't want to do that work. I mean, if I was a complete IT guy, I would be going, well, maybe it's easier for us to do this. So a lot of times your IT department will be your most conservative, and what you have to do is work with your management to get either as you get new people on board to make sure that they're comfortable with the newer technologies that come out, or sort of schmooze up to your IT group and make sure that they're willing to let you try new things and different things. But a lot of times, it's very true, is that the IT department can be very conservative. And so, it's one of those factors that you do have to take into account when you are making your decisions. So as we talk about decisions and decision making, there are kind of 3 areas. There's the decision-making process, the decision makers, like those people who make them, and of course decisions are made at all different levels, and so we'll talk a little bit about the ins and outs of that, and then the decision itself. So here we go, decision-making and problem-solving. And this is one of those things that people talk about, and really it's not the same thing. Problem-solving is a different animal than decision-making. Problem-solving is really concerned with just overcoming obstacles in something that you're going towards. It may not even require an action on your part, right? So you have to think about that. And really, at the end of the day, a decision is an act that requires, judgment, and then you move your judgment into action. And this, of course, relates to your personal level all the way up through your professional life, as you decide on, what specialty you want to do as you move into libraries deeper, if you want to go to administration, whatever you want to do, it really does require you to make some kind of a judgment call and then act on that. And Heather 3 says that problem solving is what happens after management makes a decision. Yeah, that's very true in some cases. Now, having been in management and being in management, I might say that we do that to challenge you guys so that you can step up and show us if you're management material or not. That's the way I would spin it anyway. Now, the actuality of it is, at some point you just got to make a decision and go with it, and problems are probably going to occur from that. but that is a good point, Heather. So really, decision-making, therefore, is much more comprehensive, and the terms are a bit interrelated. So let's talk a little bit about decision-making and how that's done. So how many of you have ever been in like a group that's trying to make a decision? Yeah, everybody. A lot of folks have. Now, was it a fun process? Did you enjoy doing that? Sometimes it's a fun process, exactly. And one of the organizations I worked in, which I will not name, but one of the things that they really strived for was consensus. They wanted everybody to agree on something. So that right away, you know that that was one of the academic libraries that I worked in and not one of the public libraries I worked in. One of the things I can say about the difference between working in an academic and a public library, in an academic library, there tends to be a lot of tolerance for the long decision-making process, whereas in most of the public libraries I've been in or worked with, not so much. You know, they want to decide on something, they want to make a good decision, and then they want to do it and get into it and keep on moving. And there's a question that says, are problems always solved when a decision is made? Not always. Could you give us an example of a time maybe when there was a decision that was made? Well, and maybe a certain problem is solved, but another problem is created. It's like, and here's an example. I think that kind of fits into that. So say you're working at a university or a public library or a library somewhere, and they want to extend their hours. They want to have hours open from, say, midnight or 1 a.m. up until, you know, all night long. Now, the first thing you're going to get is every librarian in the organization is going to say, hey, that's a great idea, but I am not working the desk after like 9 o'clock. Because this does not happen. And so then if you work through the process, usually it falls on the shoulders of library assistants to run the desk from during those late hours. So what happens is there was a decision made, and part of the problem was solved. The problem of how can we keep the desk open late was solved, right? Because we hire people, usually library assistants, to do that. But there's still the problem of there's no professional librarians on the desk. So I can see a situation where maybe a decision is made, but the problems are not always solved. Have you been in those kind of discussions or in that sort of a situation? So yeah, I mean, yeah, it is part of the deal. And of course, a lot of times, if you're deciding on IT, if we step back and look at the IT process, so you're looking at your process, you're looking at what products are out there, what services are out there that you want to do. Your decision may be, we're going to wait 6 months and resurvey the environment because we don't feel that there's a tool out there right now that'll solve the problem that we have. And therefore, you know, a decision was made, the decision was made to hold off or wait a little bit longer. So therefore, you know, whatever problem was occurring because of whatever technology we're looking for was not solved. So there's a couple of examples of that. It is a process, yes, very much so. And then, of course, there's organizational decision-making, which is a huge animal. And, you know, getting a lot of people to decide something together can take a lot of time. And an example of this from some of the things that I've done in the past, and when I worked at Georgia State University, my first job there was as digital technologies librarian. And so my first thing to do was go around and help people decide on whether they were going to do electronic theses and dissertations or not. And some of that groundwork had been done. And then my job was to go out and kind of finish it up, get everybody to agree, and move that process forward. And one of the issues I ran into really quickly at Georgia State was that there is no central graduate school for all the graduate programs, or at least at the time there wasn't. And so what you had to do was go to each individual college within the university, and then go to each individual college and then try to get all of those people to agree. Now, there was some structure in place where a lot of those people had regular meetings anyway, so the graduate advisors for each college met, but it was a bit of a process, making that organizational decision. And I think everybody but, at the time, everybody but the fine arts department got on board with it, because what they saw individually, each one of the colleges, the people who were running it saw, was a way to reduce their workload, because then they didn't have to manage the print theses and dissertations anymore, and they could just move it to a straight up electronic system, and they really liked that idea. So being involved in organizational decision making can be really huge, because there are so many people involved and a lot of different opinions. And like building buildings. So have any of you been involved in a building project for a library? I mean, that's like a daily decision-making fiesta, right? Your everything you do is yeah, renovation projects count. So I mean, that's just like every day you're trying to decide on something and taking in the best information you can get, that kind of thing. But in any event, so you see where decision making can be done at many different levels. So anywhere from individual decision making. One of the things that Sarah and I, when we worked together, we were deciding on instant message clients for doing IM chat. Right. And that was kind of a group decision-making process. A lot of it was a group of two, but we helped people see it our way. Now, if you read the decision-making literature and you look out there and see all the stuff that people write about decision-making, a couple of things they talk about is managers and management people always have to make decisions. It's kind of up to them, and depending on where you are in the management hierarchy, it depends on the type of decisions you make and where those fit into your organization. So are any of you management folks? Do you fall under the heading of, not only do I have to do my job, but I have to not babysit, but have to oversee a lot of other people as well? Oh, good. Excellent. So you're familiar, with the decisions you have to make on a day-to-day process. And really, once you start reading about this decision-making process, it really is just kind of codifying and giving you some extra tools for what you really do normally. And so there's not a lot of mystery into it. It really is just a way of taking what you do and breaking it down into stages and steps and helping you move through the process. And I really liked this first statement, which is that decisions that are made by lower levels of management implement the strategic decisions of top managers and the way an organization operates. And so you can point to that no matter where you are by looking at the 5-year plan or the strategic plan or that kind of thing. So when you're in a meeting with other managers and administrators, anytime you bring something up, a lot of times the first question is, well, how does that fit into the 5-year plan? Or does that replace something that we're trying to do in the 5-year plan? And so as you move forward and move up, one of your jobs is to look at those plans and say, well, we said we were going to do instant message referencing, and that's great, but now we actually have to do it, and we have to find the software to do it, and we have to assess the software. And if you work at a state agency, you might have to do an RFP if you're going to buy something. And it can get really detailed and really complex really fast. But if you have that 5-year plan to start with, then it's really great. And I talk about this a little bit too much, but as I'm thinking about it, I remember when I was a new young librarian many years ago, and I had very low tolerance for the 5-year plan process or the strategic plan process. It was kind of like, yeah, we're going to do stuff. Let's get on with it and do some stuff and get going. And why bother? Why are we doing all of this planning? But at the end of the day, as I look back on it now, I can say, well, if you've got a good plan, then it really does give you a roadmap for decisions that you want to make in the future and where you're going to go. So I think the planning process is important. And actually, I would say if you're in the IT industry, then one of the things to think about as well is a 5-year plan actually something you want to do, or do you really need to make it a 2-year plan or an 18-month plan? Because IT changes so rapidly in some cases and so fast that if you get to the end of a 5-year strategic plan, anything that you're looking at doing year 4 and 5 out there may not even exist anymore. It may be completely replaced with some other type of technology. And of course, decisions invariably involve change, right? So change is a huge issue for a lot of libraries and a lot of organizations in general. So it's something else you have to think about when you're making decisions. So here are just a few decision-making, words or terms. If you can codify stuff enough, of course, you can do the computing thing. And in the IT world, there are these decision support tools. So there's all this software where you put all this information in, and it really helps you make a decision. And then, of course, there's the decisions you make just based on your judgment and knowledge, which may or may not be a good thing. Compromise, there's always compromise in any kind of decision. And sometimes, you just have an inspiration. And we'll talk about that in just a minute if I haven't spent up all my time on a decision that was, as a case study, we'll look at a decision that was made. So there are a couple of categories of decisions. There's your routine decisions, your category 1, which these are the things you kind of decide on every year, but like you usually pick the same thing. Or like if you have a vendor that you really like working with and you're on a year-to-year contract, if you work for the state of Georgia anyway, one of the state laws is if you're a state agency, you can't have more than a year-to-year contract with anybody, but any contract that you have, you can go up to 5 years of renewing it. So if you have a vendor you really like and you work with them for the first year and you just want to keep going, then you just renew the contract. So that's kind of a routine decision-making process, because you just go to the end and you go, okay, we're going to do the paperwork and renew the contract and just keep going. And then, of course, there's the non-routine things, and you never know exactly how those are going to work out. So if you're doing something different, or you're looking at implementing a new system or a new service, that kind of thing, that's kind of what that is. And this is just a little chart. I think I'm going to skip past this and keep moving because my time is running a little short. All right, so top management people tend to make those Category 2 decisions, and your day-to-day managers tend to make the Category 1 decisions. And then the middle management people, who are always the people that get stuck, right, is they supervise the making of those Category 1 decisions, but then they have to support the Category 2 decisions. So you're in the middle, right? The people who report to you, who may manage other units, make decisions, and you sort of help them and say, okay, that's a good idea. And then you have to explain it to your upper management. And then your upper management people make those difficult, odd, unusual decisions and communicate that to you. And then you have to take that and explain it to the people who work for you. So, you know, as the middle management person, you really are in an odd role where you're involved in a lot of decision making, but a lot of times you don't make those decisions. You help out, but you're not the one that makes them, but then you're the one that has to support them and explain them up and down the chain. So that's why I always enjoyed being a middle manager, because it always gave you something to do. And so there are a lot of characteristics of decision making. There's long range. You really do have to commit resources, you know, that kind of thing. So as you're looking at a decision you're making, you have to think about these things, right? You know, how long is this decision going to last? If you're buying an ILS or you're changing your ILS, most libraries stay on the same system anywhere between 5 and 7 years, and put quite a bit of their resources into that system. So that very much is a long-range goal for your decision-making, or a very long-range decision. It's not like deciding, you know, what PCs to buy, which is usually a 2 or 3 year decision. So there is some difference in the way you think about those things. And this is sort of the Category 2 decision making and the upper level management, and you know, really trying to decision makers tend to overestimate success. And that goes back to what somebody was saying earlier, right, about, you know, the managers make the decisions, and then the people who work for them have to solve the problems. So have any of you been in a situation where somebody rolls out something new to you and says, hey, this is going to solve all your problems, and it never really solves all your problems? That's kind of what that sort of is pointing to, yeah. So let me run through a real quick risk. This is kind of a risk and a decision-making case study. And for those of you who are not Georgia people, you may not be familiar with Pines and Evergreen, but basically Pines is a collective group of basically what's going on is that Pines is a collective group of about 300 and some libraries in the state of Georgia, and Evergreen is an open source ILS that those libraries use. And basically the way it came to be is that the Pines group was originally on a commercial ILS, and it wasn't doing what they needed. And so the decision was made to create an open source tool, an open source ILS, to manage all of these libraries. And the interesting piece to that, really, it goes back to the person who's the state librarian here in Georgia and his high level of risk tolerance, because it really was a risky thing. Now that it's a success and a lot of people use Evergreen, you're like, well, yeah, of course they did it. But if you can remember back to when they were first talking about doing it, most of the people in the library world said they were crazy for doing it. And that upper level management decision, I mean, he basically put his job on the line because he was committing a lot of state resources to creating this service. So there was that big, risk-taking decision, and then there were the tons of other decisions that were made to get Evergreen up and off the ground. And in retrospect, it was a great success. But can you imagine, going to your library director and saying, well, we know there's a lot of commercial tools out there that do X, whatever you want to do, but we think that we can build something in-house that'll work a lot better, and all we need is some money and some time to do it. And at the end of the day, it may work or it may not work, but we're willing to give it a shot. And so it really, that in and of itself is a great example of somebody who's willing to take big risk and who got big payoff through that decision process of deciding to go with Evergreen. And they didn't just decide, hey, we're going to do this. They did a very large-scale study of the ILS market at the time. They talked to almost any ILS vendor that was out there who was willing to talk to them. They looked at all of the possibilities, and after they looked at all of the possibilities, they decided that building their own really was the best way to go. But that was, it was a huge risk. And so they, they did their research, they did their due diligence, and then as they built the system, they went out and talked to people and, did some more decision support stuff. So they went out and talked to people. What pieces do we need to build first? What do you want it to look like? What do we want it to do? So they really included a lot of different people in the decision process when they were creating the tool. So it really was a great example of risk-taking and supporting Evergreen, or supporting the development of that ILS system. So, and one of the things that I said we were going to talk about too is like finding IT info, and we'll get there in just a second. But let's recap a little bit on this whole decision process. So as you're thinking about it, and as you're out there making your own decisions, or even trying to help your management people, make decisions, one of the things you want to be sure and do is make informed decisions. A lot of times people say, oh, well, I can just make a gut reaction decision and that'll be good enough, or it'll be something that I'm willing to go with. But what you really want to do is make sure that you do have all of the information in place. And that being said, especially in the IT world, that's not something you can do in a couple of weeks of study. That's one of those things where, you need to spend some time every week reading up on IT in general, on technology, on things that are emerging and things that are out there, so that you'll have a good sense of the environment. And really, I think a lot of times where that instinctive gut feeling decision comes from, the ones that are really good are people who actually spend a huge amount of time doing the research on the front end, and that gut reaction comes from all the stuff they've read and done in the past. So, if you're going in and you're making a decision, the things to think about are, what is the risk tolerance of your organization and the risk tolerance of your institution and the risk tolerance of yourself? Are you willing to put it out there to do this? And the chat post by Martha makes some really good points. Sometimes you just never know exactly what's gonna happen, even when you're trying to anticipate issues. But in any case, you set up your risk tolerance, and then you kind of set up your decision matrix. You start looking at, what level of decision is this? Is this a routine decision? Is it something that happens every year? Is it something we need to reassess? Or is it one of those kind of out there decisions that's going to require buy-in from upper level management? And if it's going to require buy-in from upper level management, how do we get that? How do we factor that into what we're trying to do? And then you start doing your due diligence, and you bring together all of your information, and you really look at step by step, what tool you're looking at and what you want that to do. and how that's moving forward. And a couple of really good tools out there, especially in the IT environment, and there's a ton of stuff, right? There's blogs and there's wikis, there's Twitter, there's magazines, there's journals, there's a ton of stuff up out there. But there are a couple of pieces that are really good to look at and kind of be aware of regularly. And those things are, at least in my mind, are the Gartner Hype Cycle, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may have not. But basically, the Gartner Group is this big technology think tank that does a lot of business intelligence. They recommend technologies to businesses and that kind of thing. I've always said this would be the greatest job in the world to have, right? Because these guys write 3- and 4-page reports and then sell them to big companies for like $5,000 and $6,000 a piece. And a lot of companies, if you write one, you have 10 companies that buy it, and it's $6,000 a report, you just made $60,000. So how can you beat that? But one of the things they put out every year is this hype cycle, and basically the idea is that technologies tend to go along this curve, right? And initially they start going up, and people think, as technologies catch on, that the technology is going to solve everybody's problem and be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then it gets up to the top of the peak, and people start realizing it's not going to do everything that it was said it was going to do. And then it kind of, people lose interest, or they start looking at other things, and it goes down. And then either it kind of hangs out in that trough of disillusionment where, okay, so it is kind of a dead technology, or it picks up and sort of levels off into, hey, this is something that we can use, right? This is something that we can look at. Trough of disillusionment. Yeah, I love that. I love that term. And that's actually in change management, they use that term as well. And I love, any kind of chart or curve that has a trough in it. That's what I always imagine that trough to be, is when you're down there, everybody's like, oh. I think I'm going to start a blog and call it the trough of disillusionment. But in any event, and so then things level off. But as somebody who decides IT and who's looking at IT stuff, you may want to track this and look at this every year when it comes out, and kind of keep a copy of it around. And the best part about this is it's free, and they put it out there for everybody to see. So it's one of the few free things that they do, but it is a great thing to look at. And I will say for IT stuff, another just tip is don't limit yourself to just library writing on IT. Don't look at what library IT pundits have to say. Look at the wider IT community and look at some of those things that are out there. Somebody's Karen saying it reminds her of some of her friends who got iPhones and then were disillusioned how often they drop. Yeah, the iPhone's great unless you want to make a phone call on it, which that's supposed to change right now. That's coming to Verizon. Yeah. Exactly. So hopefully, and for those of you that don't know, Verizon has said if you bought a new smartphone from them from right after Thanksgiving until I think last week sometime, that if you want to trade that in on a new iPhone, they will let you pay the full purchase price of the iPhone and give you a 2-year contract and give you like a $200 gift card from like a Visa gift card, but you have to turn in your old phone. So I don't know where there's a lot of savings for you in there other than you get the iPhone. But anyway, this graph, I found this online, but yeah, it is the Gartner Group. I think it's Gartner. Yeah. So that's good. And then these three things are always great. The Horizon Report that comes out every year is definitely a must-read. It comes out usually in January, so there should be a new one left. The Pew Internet Reports, of course, are always a great place to get good statistics and see what people are thinking and see what's going on. And for those of you that are not familiar with EDUCAUSE is a great, and yeah, Wikipedia does have a nice page on the hype cycle. There's actually a book out too that's called Managing the Hype Cycle, and it was written by one of the Gartner folks, and it really talks about how to leverage the hype cycle and get the most out of that information that's available to you. So, excellent. So, but EDUCAUSE is a phenomenal resource even for public library folks. A lot of EDUCAUSE content is locked down, and you have to be a member. Usually, if you're in an academic institution, somewhere your institution is a member, and you just have to ferret out that information. If you have an instructional technology group on your campus, they will know that information. But EDUCAUSE is a great place to learn a lot of stuff, and they do have a lot of free stuff up there. One of the best things they do for just general IT knowledge is this thing called 7 Things You Should Know, and they have all of these documents that are like 7 things you should know about, and the QR codes or blogs or whatever. And so if you go in there and poke around, they have these really good, really quick one-page documents to look at that talk about some basic IT stuff. But these are really great forecasting things and things to keep you looking in the future and kind of knowing what's going on out there. And another thing to keep in mind, and this is something that I try to pay attention to, is, yeah, this is great to have the moderators putting out links to everything that I'm talking about. So that's kind of fun. I like that. I don't have that when I teach a class by myself because it's just me. I forget to do it sometimes, but so thanks, Sarah and Karen. But there's this thing called the Technology Adoption Lifecycle, and basically what it says is for any technology, you have those early adopters. You have those people who are going to jump on and use something no matter what. And it's like those people that bought flat screen TVs back when the picture on the flat screen TV was worse than a picture on a regular television. And so, those people are going to buy, they're going to buy an iPhone whether it works or not because it's the iPhone. It's the latest and greatest, and they want to use it. And then after that, there's this kind of chasm that people can, or technologies or ideas will jump and move into these people who are early majority. So they're not completely early adopters, but they're kind of like mid-early adopters. And those are going to be people who are like, start seeing the value in something. And once it reaches the top of that curve and gets over into the late majority people, that's really when a technology takes off. And so you might want to think about different things, different technologies you're looking at in this light and go, well, if all my users of this type of technology are really this early market visionary group, I don't want to spend a lot of resources on it, but I want to keep an eye on it. I want to see where it's going and see what it's going to do. And then once it makes that jump, then it's something you might want to seriously start taking a look at and putting into your decision process and trying to say, well, is this something we want to try? Is it something we want to do? Where it wants to go? But what I like the best, and I've heard this example a couple of times, and these people, these laggards, this little piece that's over here in the corner, these are the people who would still be using rotary telephones if they existed, if they could get them. So, and they would, never use anything else. They might even be using telegraphs if that was possible for them. So I really like that. Yeah, buggy whip manufacturers, exactly. And I love that group on the end, though, because anytime you're making an IT decision, you need at least one of those people just to keep the people from the other end, the visionaries, sane. The people like me who are like, oh, let's just try it. It's IT. It's got to be fun. So we need those people on the other end to balance us off. Cool. Thanks, Karen. And so that's at the end of my talk. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes left in my session. And so I appreciate your time and helping me start to formulate my thoughts on decision support. And it always helps me to, do a presentation on something that I'm trying to formulate and work through my head, because usually I get a lot of good feedback, like I have today, on some of the different aspects of stuff that's out there. So I appreciate your time very much. And if there are any questions, just type them in the chat, and we'll go that route. So I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
There will be a recording, and I try to get those out the same day, although sometimes circumstances conspire against me and it ends up being the morning after. But yeah, there will be a recording in the immediate future.
Oh, you're welcome, Deborah.
If nobody else has questions at the moment. Oh, Tim, would you turn your mic off?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry. We can't have two at the same time. They don't play well together. If nobody else has questions at the moment, I'm sure Tim would be happy to field your questions later via email if you wanted to go ahead and shoot them over to him. But we will go ahead and wrap up. I did just want to take a minute to say to say something about Pat Carterette. She was a co-planner and co-founder of this series, and she did pass last week from cancer. And Buffy Hamilton and I did decide that we're going to rename this series in honor of Pat. So the name is going to be changing to the Marathon Webinars. And we just wanted to take a moment to just, say something about Pat. We do miss her very much. And on that note, thanks for attending. You will be able to register very soon for the March 16th webinars. And there will also be a special session for school media specialists in February, if any of you are school media people, because we have identified a problem with attendance during the day for school media specialists. So it will be in the evening, and hopefully that will be helpful to people. And the sessions for March will be on, there will be excuse me, I got my notes all mixed up here. Robin Fay will be speaking on identity management online, and Casey Long and I will actually also be presenting on strategic planning for social media, specifically blogs. And the certificate request, I'm going to go ahead and type that in over here on the side, and you can go ahead and submit that online, and you can get a CE certificate if you're in the state of Georgia and you would like that to for your work. And thanks everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see you shortly. Our next webinar is supposed to be starting at 11:15. We've been trying to get Elizabeth Shields' audio working, but so far we haven't been able to make it happen. So if we can't make it happen in the next 5 minutes or so, I think what we're going to go ahead and do is just close out this, and we will go ahead and record the session later and just send that out to everybody after the fact. And I do apologize. It's actually the nightmare of the webinar delivery person is that your audio won't work. So I hope that that won't be an inconvenience for anyone. And thanks again, everybody, for coming.